There was a specific moment when your cat decided you were its person. Not a gradual warming, not a slow, undramatic accumulation of tolerance that eventually became something resembling affection. A moment, a specific, identifiable, neurologically real moment when something shifted inside your cat. When you moved in the internal map it was building of its world, from the category of unfamiliar to the category of mine. You didn't notice it when it happened. Almost nobody does, because the geisty moment itself looked like nothing. It looked like an ordinary Tuesday. It looked like your cat sitting somewhere in the room, doing the thing cats do where they appear to be thinking about absolutely nothing. It looked, from the outside, completely unremarkable. But something was happening underneath that composed exterior that was neither ordinary nor unremarkable, something that the field of animal behavior is only now developing the language to describe properly. A decision, or something so close to a decision that the distinction barely matters, was being made. An assessment was being completed, a verdict was being reached. And the verdict, reached quietly and without ceremony on some ordinary day you have long since forgotten, was you. But here's the thing. The story of how your cat arrived at that verdict, the specific things it was watching for, the precise moments it was evaluating, the particular qualities in you that satisfied criteria you didn't know you were being tested against, is one of the most fascinating stories in the entire science of animal behavior. And understanding it will not just tell you something about your cat. It will tell you something about yourself that you might not have known. Stay with me. Because the moment in this story that tends to stop people completely, the one where they realize exactly when it happened for them, is still ahead. Let's begin where the story actually begins. Not in your home and not on the day you first met, but much earlier, in the first weeks of your cat's life, in a developmental window so brief and so critical that what happens inside it shapes everything that follows for the next 15 or 20 years. Behavioral researchers call it the sensitive period. It opens around 2 weeks of age, when the kitten's eyes and ears become functional, and it closes somewhere around 7 to 9 weeks, a span of time so short that it could fit inside a single month of a human calendar. During this window, the kitten's brain is in a state of radical plasticity. It is not simply experiencing the world. It is being permanently configured by it. Every sensory input during this period does not just inform the kitten, it shapes the architecture of what the kitten will become. The smells, sounds, textures, and beings that surround it during these weeks are not just experiences, they are instructions, biological programming that writes itself into the developing neural tissue and becomes, over time, the template through which everything that comes later will be filtered. A kitten that is handled gently by humans during this window, that is spoken to softly, held carefully, surrounded by the particular combination of sights and sounds and smells that accompany human presence, encodes something at a neural level that goes far beyond a simple positive association. It encodes humans as a category of being that belongs in the world it is safe to inhabit. It builds, in the first weeks of its consciousness, a baseline expectation that human presence is normal, that human hands are not threats, that the sound of a human voice falls into the register of familiar and therefore safe. This encoding does not specify a person, it specifies a type, a template, a collection of qualities that the cat's developing brain will spend the rest of its life using as a filter, asking of every human it encounters whether this one matches the pattern it learned to recognize as safe. And what most owners don't realize is that by the time their cat first encountered them, however that meeting happened, it was already carrying this filter, already running every sensory input from the new human through the template it built before it could fully see. Already asking a question it had been asking since the very first weeks of its life. Is this one of the safe ones? The answer to that question, the one your cat arrived at about you on some ordinary day in the early weeks of your relationship, was not reached instantly. It was not love at first sight in the dramatic, cinematic sense that phrase implies. It was something more careful than that, more patient, more methodical, and in some ways far more meaningful. Cats assess. This is one of the most fundamental things about them, the quality that has been misread as aloofness and dismissed as coldness and complained about by people who wanted a relationship that arrived fully formed rather than one that had to be earned. Cats assess with the same extraordinary sensory precision that they bring to everything else. They watch, they measure, they gather data across multiple channels simultaneously and build, over time, a picture of the being they are evaluating that goes deeper and wider than almost any assessment process available to human social cognition. They are reading your body temperature, the specific chemical signature of your skin, the cortisol level of your breath, the tension or relaxation in your posture when you are near them, the way your hands move, whether they reach or whether they offer, Whether your voice changes when you address them or stays at the register it uses for the rest of the world. Whether your attention is consistent or flickering. Whether you mean the same thing 2 days in a row, or whether you are a variable, an uncertainty, a source of unpredictable inputs that the cat's nervous system cannot build a reliable model around. All of this data is being collected, continuously, quietly, in the particular patient way of an animal that has always survived by being more accurate than the world around it gave it credit for. And at some point, on some specific day, in some specific moment that neither you nor your cat would be able to articulate, the data crossed a threshold. The picture became complete enough. The pattern became clear enough. The weight of accumulated evidence tipped into something the cat's brain registered as settled, as decided as no, longer requiring the same level of assessment that the uncertain had required. You became known, truly known. And known, in the internal geography of a cat's world, is the same thing as safe, and safe is the same thing as chosen. Now let's talk about what that moment probably actually looked like, because it was not nothing, even if it appeared to be. And there are a small number of specific micro-events, brief, easily missed, almost invisible in the flow of ordinary daily interaction, that researchers in feline behavior have identified as the likely tipping points. The moments when the assessment completes and the decision lands. One of the most common is the first time your cat fell asleep near you, not on you, necessarily, not pressed against you in the deliberate, contact-seeking way of a cat that has already bonded, just near you, in the same room, close enough that you were within its awareness, within its sensory field, and it closed its eyes anyway. Sleep, as we have explored, is the most vulnerable thing a cat can do. The complete surrender of the vigilance that keeps it alive. And that surrender, the first unguarded sleep in your presence, required something from your cat that it had been withholding carefully and appropriately until that moment. It required the conclusion that you were safe enough to sleep near, that you were predictable enough and trustworthy enough and known enough that the risk of unconsciousness in your vicinity had become, finally, acceptable. That first sleep near you was not an accident. It was not a cat that simply got sleepy in an inconvenient location. It was a verdict. The most embodied, most irreversible verdict your cat has available to give. Something deeper happened the first time your cat closed its eyes near you than a cat taking a nap. Another version of this moment, perhaps the most specific and the most documented, involves something so small that most owners pass it by without registering it as significant at all. The first time your cat sat down and turned its back to you. We explored the turned back in an earlier story, the extraordinary trust it represents, the biological cost of exposing the unguarded spine to any presence that has not been completely assessed and cleared. But in the specific context of the decision moment, in the first time this behavior appeared in your relationship, it carries an additional layer of significance. The first turn back was not a gesture in an established relationship. It was the establishment of the relationship. It was your cat processing the full weight of everything it had gathered about you, every data point, every observed behavior, every scent and sound and moment of stillness or movement, and reaching the conclusion on the other side of all of it that was the foundation of everything that came after. Safe, known, mine, and expressing that conclusion in the only language it had, with its body, with the most vulnerable surface it possessed, turned toward you, held there, without looking back. That was the moment. For many cats, with many owners, that turned back was the moment, the decision made visible, the verdict, delivered in the language of the unguarded spine. And you probably didn't notice, because it looked like a cat sitting down. But here's the thing. The moment of decision, however and whenever it happened, was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of one. And what happened after the decision, the way your cat behaved in the weeks and months following that quiet, invisible turning point, tells a story that deserves to be recognized for what it is. Cats that have decided on a person show a specific, cumulative, unmistakable pattern of behavior that researchers describe as proximity seeking with a preferred individual. They begin to organize their daily geography around you. Not obviously, not with the demonstrative enthusiasm of a dog. Quietly, incrementally, the routes they travel. Through the house, start to include you as a landmark. The places they choose to rest start to shift toward wherever you tend to be. The timing of their social approaches, the moments they choose to initiate contact or simply to appear nearby, begins to align with the rhythms of your day in ways too consistent to be coincidental. What most owners don't realize is that this reorganization of daily life around another being is not a trivial thing for a cat to do. Cats are profoundly territorial. The spatial geography of their world, which routes they travel, which spots they occupy, which locations they consider safe, is not casual or arbitrary. It is carefully established and deeply meaningful. And to reorganize that geography around a person, to make another being a landmark in the map of your territory, a fixed point around which the rest of the world arranges itself, represents something that the cat does not do lightly, does not do often, and does not undo easily. When your cat began to orbit your life, when the pattern of its daily movement started to include you as its center of gravity, it was not behaving randomly. It was expressing, in the most concrete and behavioral language available to it, the decision it had already made. You were the landmark, you were the center, you were, in the territory of your cat's inner life, the place it kept returning to. And this is where it gets interesting. Because the decision your cat made, that quiet, unremarkable-looking, irreversible decision on some ordinary day in the early weeks of your relationship, was not made with conditions attached. It was not provisional. It was not based on the assumption that things between you would always be easy or always be perfect, or always feel the way the first good weeks felt. Cats that bond do not unbond easily. This is one of the most important and most underappreciated things about feline attachment. The same slow, careful, data-intensive process that makes forming the bond difficult makes breaking it resilient. The architecture that was built carefully is not dismantled casually. The decision that required weeks of evidence to reach does not reverse because of a bad day or a confusing interaction, or a week when life was too busy for the usual rhythms of connection. Your cat decided on you, and then it kept deciding. Every day since, in the small, quiet, accumulated ways that cats renew their bonds. The approaches and the leaning ins and the mornings spent close, and the nights spent monitoring from the doorway. It has been choosing you again. Not out of inertia, not because it forgot to choose differently, but because the evidence, gathered fresh every day through those extraordinary senses, keeps arriving at the same conclusion it arrived at on that first day the decision was made. You are still safe. You are still known. You are still the one. Let me tell you about one more thing, something that tends to produce a very specific quality of stillness when people hear it for the first time. Your cat remembers the moment it chose you, not as a memory in the narrative, story-shaped sense that humans carry memories, but as something encoded in its body, in the neural pathways that were written during the assessment period and that have shaped every interaction since. The template it was building when it was watching you most carefully in those early uncertain weeks is still the template it uses to recognize you now. When you walk into a room, your cat is not just seeing a person. It is recognizing the particular configuration of sensory inputs, your gait, your scent, the frequency of your voice, the specific biochemical signature that is you. Against a template built specifically to receive them, you have a shape in your cat's brain, a unique, detailed, precisely rendered shape that was constructed from the data of those first careful weeks and has been maintained and refined through every interaction since. You are known in your cat's neurology in a way that is specific to you and impossible to replicate. No one else in the world produces the exact pattern of inputs that your cat's brain has learned to recognize as the signal that you have arrived, that the safe thing has returned, that the center of the territory is present and accounted for and everything is, accordingly, as it should be. That recognition, that specific, neurologically embedded, entirely individual knowing of you, is what happens. Every time your cat looks up when you enter a room, every time it orients toward the sound of your car in the driveway, every time it wakes from sleep, not at a sound from outside, but at the specific familiar vibration of your footsteps on the floor, it has always known it was you, before you said a word, before you made a sound, because it built a shape for you in its brain on the day it decided, and that shape has never stopped being the truest thing it knows. So here is what I want you to sit with at the end of this story. There was a day, an ordinary, unremarkable, long-forgotten day, when your cat looked at you with the full force of everything its senses could bring to bear, weighed everything it had observed and felt and measured in the careful, patient weeks before, and made a decision that has quietly governed the entire relationship ever since. It decided you were safe. It decided you were worth the vulnerability of sleep, of the turn back, of the daily reorganization of its world around your presence. It decided that the risk of caring about something as unpredictable and as mortal and as complicated as a human being was worth taking. For you, specifically, and only for you. You didn't notice the moment. It didn't announce itself. It arrived the way the most important things always arrive. Quietly, in the middle of a Tuesday, dressed in the ordinary clothes of a cat simply sitting in a room. But it happened. It was real. And it has been real. Every day since, in every approach, every slow blink, every morning appearance at your door, every night spent close enough to feel your breathing change, your cat picked you, on a day you don't remember, in a moment you didn't see, and it has never looked back. That is not nothing. That has never, not once, been nothing. That is the most quietly extraordinary thing that has ever happened in the ordinary geography of your daily life. And now, finally, you know it. If this story made you think back to that ordinary day when everything between you and your cat began, share it with someone whose cat picked them without them ever knowing the full weight of what that meant. And if you want to keep discovering what your cat has been doing all along, stay right here. There will always be more to find.